welcome to the Soccer Coaching Podcast, brought to you in association with our friends at Soccer Coach Weekly, reflecting our shared ambition to help coaches have the most effective, enjoyable and successful coaching journey for them and their players. We hope you enjoyed this episode and thanks for listening. Hi Nick, welcome to the Soccer Coaching Podcast. We are delighted to have you. How are you doing?
I'm all good, thanks. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much. I'm not too bad at all. Again, I say this all the time, but always grateful for the guests that volunteer their time or give up their time to agree to come on the podcast. And you've kindly done that as well. I know how super busy you are and all the things you've got going on. So thank you so much for saying yes and giving up a little bit of time to talk all things coaching.
Yeah, no problem at all. Although I don't know anyone that's not busy.
That is true.
So no, but it's cool. Any time just to chat about coaching is all good with me.
Well, you'd have thought this new way of working where we've embraced technology, one of the silver line maybe to the pandemic is the fact we've all had to kind of embrace technology a bit more than what I've done previously, would give us all more time. But I think that's not the way, is it? We're using excuse now to reach out to more people and make more of our time, right? I guess that's what it is.
Yeah, I think it's probably just a different opportunity that we didn't have quite as readily before. But for people like yourself, it affords the chance to connect with people around the world in different ways that you might not have been able to do before. And I think hopefully we'll just kind of continue that, I guess, that learning in a different way, as opposed to, we used to have to go somewhere and see Scott standing up in front of people for 2 hours chatting or putting on some sessions, and you have to see it in that way. But yeah, it's different
ways of doing things. Yeah, brilliant. Well, Nick, we had a brief chat before we hit the record button, just very brief. But I'll embarrass you now a little bit and put lots of pressure on you by saying that when we started the podcast maybe 3 years ago, there was half a dozen guests I wanted on, and you were certainly one of those 5 or 6 people. It took me a bit of time to get the confidence to ask you to come on, but when I did, you kindly said yes straight away. So I really am grateful for that. And the reason I think is not just because you're a wonderful experience, we'll talk about that in a minute and stuff, but I also think when I've heard you speak about coaching and youth development and stuff, it really resonates with what I was looking for 6, 7, 8 years ago, and it's really helped me on my journey. And I'm hoping what will happen over the next half an hour to an hour or so, listeners will get a bit of that from you through our podcast, and hopefully it will help them too. So I'm looking forward to this. No pressure. I'll build you up now, but I am really, really delighted to have you on the podcast. No,
look, that's very kind of you and very flattering. So let's hope the next hour isn't wasted for everybody that goes, oh, that was a massive letdown by the end of it. So let's try and avoid that.
I'm confident it won't be. Brilliant. Well, look, Nick, I do know a bit about you. And obviously, I've followed some of the things, especially over the last maybe 5+ years. But for those that maybe don't or aren't fully up to date in what it is you've done and what it is you currently do, you happy to give us a bit of an overview?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I do a couple of things at the moment, then I'll work backwards if that's easiest. So I'm head of coaching at UK Coaching, is my day job, if you like. So we are a coaching agency that works with anybody from sport and physical activity in the grassroots community, local area, all the way through to programs to support coaches that go to Olympic Games, Paralympic Games, and that live in that kind of professional sport, high performance world. And our role is to support coaches and develop coaches across that whole breadth of different areas, which is a real broad group, as you can imagine, from kind of community to high performance. And I also have a role, I guess, in my part-time as my hobby. I've got a title of director of football. I don't really know what it means still. But effectively what I do, this is at a semi-professional football club here in England, and I work with coaches and the kids, probably from the little ones at under 8s, all the way through to having coached for most of the season. The first team of which they are paid to play. Most of them are ex-academy, ex-professional players, in some degree, that play in the kind of the 4th rung below professional football at the moment. And my role really there is to work with the coaches or the players anywhere through all of the age groups and kind of connect philosophically about how we want to play the game, how we want to coach, how we want to interact, the environment, etc. So that's probably the day job. Although I do also coach my son's under-18, which is
that's the full-time job. That's the real one.
That's the stressful one. Like the rest of it is a breeze compared to dealing with that. I'm sure we'll touch upon that as we go through. And then previously to that, I worked 17 years full-time in football. So I had a number of different roles at the Football Association, where I was talent ID manager in terms of recruitment of players and the scouting network for England under 15s through to seniors with Gareth. And I was national manager for grassroots football, so kind of leading the development of the game, smaller formats, different pathways to develop that. And for a period of time throughout that as well, I worked in a Cat 1 academy, working with under 10s, under 11s for 6 years, just because I like working with the kids, really. So yeah, a fair kind of broad mix of stuff, I suppose.
Which makes you the ideal guest for this podcast, Nick. Honestly, that is like the perfect recipe for the stuff we want to delve into and speak about. So thank you for sharing that. Were you involved with the youth modules and part of that and stuff? Was that?
Yeah. I mean, they are still, I think, one of the most influential courses that we've had within formal coach education in this country. 100%. Mainly down to the 3 people that drove each of them, but there was working groups of all of us to put them together at the same time. Yeah.
Well, and I bring this up quite a lot on the podcast because for me, being a volunteer grassroots parent coach, did my level 1 old style, did the old level 2, which was a bit more stop stand still. It was still good, but it was a bit more stop stand still. It was the youth mods 1, 2, and 3, and the youth award. That really was the bit where it kind of all came together for me, and they are and were fantastic. Of course, I think they've been slightly amalgamated now into the programs, but I think they're still there, just in a different guise. But they were fantastic, and I without knowing that for sure, I got a sense from hearing things you've done previously to the youth mods that you may have had an impact in that, along with other people as well, because it certainly feels like that there's a transitional time for the way we approach coaching, especially from the FA.
Yeah, and in fact, actually, not many people would have done it because it was a lesser known course. But I did a course in 2005. Shit, I'm showing my age now. Called the FA Youth Coaches course. Right. So this was a week-long course at Keele University that was led by a guy called John Allpress, who wrote one of the youth modules. But John Allpress led that, and it had guest speakers and people like Rod Thorpe, who kind of developed teaching games for understanding as a concept. Peter Revivian. I mean, might be stuff that we touched on anyway, but those are the people that started the revolution of coaching for me. And the youth modules, I guess, kind of spurned out of that original youth coaches course. But yeah, that philosophy as a way of coaching kind of came from that, but mainly with that kind of core group of people that developed it. But great courses.
And so for you then, I think this is an okay question to ask you. How would you kind of describe your approach to coaching, and dare I say it, maybe even your coaching philosophy?
Yeah, and it's an interesting question. And I look back and I think, I had similar experiences to yourself. I went through, before you, I did a junior team managers and a level 2. So one of the original level 2s. And when I first kind of went out and started coaching, I coached with a guy. I'm still friends with him now. He's an absolute dinosaur. And we joke about it, but I just copied how he coached. Yeah. And that's how I thought you should coach, which was stop, stand still, and I'll tell you what to do. And I'm going to translate what's in my head into yours. I mean, we know that learning doesn't happen like that necessarily, but I coached in that kind of way. But it wasn't until the youth coaches course where I then realized, okay, coaching looks different. And I think I evolved from being a technical instructor to being a coach. Yeah. And I think a lot of the early years I was a technical instructor. And I think now with, I guess, the projects I've been involved in and different things, my coaching philosophy now is it's people first and player second. It's very much now, I think, about creating an environment that enables the development of people. Now, we might help them be better at footballers in certain times, but we might also help them learn to manage their emotions at certain times. Or, as I spend a lot of my time doing at the moment, I might help them to tie their shoelaces a little bit better. But for me, it's
at the first team.
Yeah, some of them. Yeah. For me, this is, I'm now at the stage where I think we have to involve the people that we're working with in the decision making. It's not everything that they think they get. It doesn't mean, because if I said to my 7-year-old son, what do you want for dinner every night, he would say pizza and ice cream. So it doesn't necessarily, it's not everything about them. But for me, it's about co-created environments where we work together, where there's a level of autonomy for them as young people or as grown adults in the first team, that's about a feeling of belonging to something, that ultimately we're about making memories. And we set out with the first team this year, we said, right, clearly we want to try and win the league, playoffs as a minimum. That's a given. What do we want to try and do? And our whole season with a group of footballers that are paid to play is about making memories. What are the things that we're going to look back on in 15 years and go, that was awesome? We went away to Ashford, they were second, we were third. We were 2-0 down after 65 minutes. We come back to win 3-2. The changing room after, the environment, the feeling, that's the stuff that this game gives us, right? And that for me is what my coaching philosophy is about. It's people first, player second. How do we empower them to be better at what they want to get better at? But it's definitely evolved over time.
I ask this question a lot to the guests that come on, and no one's ever said making memories. I'm sure it's in there and they want to do that, but no one's actually said it. And when you think of it like that, it's suddenly making positive memories and those kind of really good feel-good moments. If that's your focus, then that's going to influence your approach, isn't it? So much, because you check yourself, and if you're going to get a bit frustrated or you're going to say something a bit negative, you think, hold on a minute, let's just how can I reposition that or get it across in a way that's going to make sure this journey is as positive as it can possibly be, right? Because it's quite emotional, isn't it? And you get caught up with it, even the under 8, let alone the first team.
Well, I'll give you 2 examples. So first team this year, we played, I can't remember who it was, who was second or third from bottom. We were 1-0 down for most of the game, and we battered them. We just couldn't score. The manager I was on the bench that day. The manager was fuming. He was effing and blind, like he was not in a good place. And we came back to win 2-1. Last minute, came back to win 2-1. And at the end of the game, he's walked onto the pitch and he's still fuming. And I jumped on him, gave him a massive cuddle, and I went, this is why we love sport, because it can do this for us. And he was like, oh, you're so right. And I'm like, yeah, because that's the emotion of it. Like 3 points, 1 point. I mean, in the scheme of it, it doesn't matter. But the feeling that sport gives you is really important. And we're getting to the end of the season with the under 8s now. It's their first proper season of playing football. And what I don't want to do is give them a tokenistic medal at the end of the year and say, thanks for playing. That doesn't cut it for me. And me and the other 2 dads that run the team, we've put together a photo book for the year that is a photo of each of the kids. Me and the other 2 coaches have written some stuff about each of the kids. But what I've also done is I've got each of the kids to write a few words on their teammates.
Brilliant.
And at the bottom it says, blah, blah, blah. Your teammates say this kind of stuff about you. So in 20 years' time, they've got a book where they can go and look back at and think about their first season of football and what other people said about them, their strengths that they had as a player. That 27 pence piece of tin from wherever it comes from doesn't attach that to it. So that for me is wrapped up in how we do things.
Well, they won't remember the score lines. Maybe the parents still might 20 years later, if they're under 8s or under 7s games, but they'll remember that, won't they? We did something similar. Our club give out trophies at the end of the year, and we have you can pick managers, player, and top goal. So you do what you want. And it never sat well with me, because you always end up upsetting someone, even if you think you've got it right. So we did a similar thing. It was under 8s as well, I think, because it was a couple of years ago now, before the pandemic kicked in. And we did awesome teammate trophies for all the under 8s. Nice. But they had to choose someone else and say a few words. My teammate is awesome because, and we've got the videos of it. And to me, it's beautiful because it's these young kids presenting, so life skill stuff there, in front of all the parents, stuff like that, and saying about someone else handing a trophy over, and it's along the same lines of what you're doing. And those are the memories, and they've got the videos and they've got the trophies still, but it links into something that's more, I guess, long term than just the score line or something that's kind of fleeting and not that important in the big scheme of things.
Absolutely. And do you know what? I'm going to steal those words.
If I can give something to you, I'm delighted.
My teammate is awesome because
awesome teammate trophies. Yeah, I'll send you a video of one of the boys doing it. It's really, honestly, I'm so proud to watch it. Like that, even as a coach, I think this isn't about the X's and O's or how many goals you scored. This is those moments, and it's that's that the life skill stuff. I think to me is, well, I know it's more important to me because I think it's probably one of my strengths rather than my coaching. So I've got to gravitate towards that. I do think there's a journey because again, the more people we talk to, the more things comes up. And I look at my coaching journey, and I think when I first started, I was kind of practice focused. I then learned by listening to people like yourself and others about being more player focused. And I think now I've got even better. I think I've got a long way to go, but even better. Now I'm more person focused. And is that kind of a journey that you think is quite common in the coaching world?
Yeah, 100%. And let's be fair. The majority of coaches, the overwhelming majority, are volunteers that are really in it to help give their kids, most of the time as parent coaches, the chance to play football with their mates. And they go to training, they might have an hour midweek, and a lot of the time in the early years of being a bit more of a novice coach, it's about survival, right? You want some practices or some games or activities that you can put on that means that the kids have fun, they get a bit better, and you can get to the end of that hour and go, right, okay, that's done and everybody survived. And you want some practices that will help you get through that. And I think there is that bit of natural evolution that, I was talking to a coach last night, the first team assistant manager at the club, and he was talking about doing his UEFA B license, and he was talking about the practices and stuff like that. So people don't really know this, but most of the season when I've done my son's team of under 8s on a Tuesday, and then the first team of semi-pros on the Thursday, I'd use the same session.
Yeah.
I would use the same session mostly. I mean, things would change a little bit, but the practice isn't it. The speed that the first team do it is with much more precision, with more quality at a different speed, with high levels of deception and disguise, and it looks different. But the mechanics of a ball moving around a pitch and people moving around the pitch and interacting with opponents in space, the game is the game, but the practice is the practice because that just facilitates the game. But I would use the similar things with the under 8s as I would do with the first team. But you're right. I think in those early years, you want practices to survive. And often as coaches, what you do is you go back to the things that either that you went through, or I remember this, which sadly was probably looking back 20 years when a lot of coaching was probably done in a different way. Or you default back to controlling the practice. I've got to make sure it looks good and it looks proper.
No chaos.
The parents are watching.
Yeah. And no chaos, no tears, nothing like that. It's got to be all organised and all polished. Yeah.
And you can manage lines of kids.
Yeah.
Because it's easier. You can put kids in boxes and manage things. But equally, what we know is that doesn't necessarily have the best impact on learning. So, and I said to the coach last night, the first thing, I think you've got to be comfortable in chaos. Like, if it's messy and the kids know what's going on, or the players do, that's okay. Who cares what other people think when they're looking at it? Because often learning happens in the chaos. So we do go through that process. And you're right. I think you then start to think about the player and what they need, because you've got a bank of practices that you can use in a different way as some kind of go-to things. But in the early years, you're developing them. And I think for coaches, it's how can we help accelerate them through to thinking about people quicker than they otherwise might have done?
Yeah, so that's a good way of summarising it. And for you then, Nick, I mean, you've got this wonderful experience. You've been around lots of people. You've already mentioned some great names already, but what's kind of been the influences that have shaped your approach to coaching then, would you say? What's kind of had the biggest impact in how you go about what you do now?
The biggest impact in terms of a person She doesn't know anything about football. Is a woman called Lynn Kidman, and Lynn Kidman is a Kiwi, and oh man, she just makes your head hurt. Like,
not because she's a Kiwi, obviously. Just
no, because she's so damn clever. Like, she'll say stuff, and you'll just go, yeah, you're just right. So she produced a couple of books, I don't know, maybe like 15 years ago, maybe, called Developing Decision Makers and Athlete-Centered Coaching. And they just flipped how I started to see the world and think about coaching. I mean, she was a coaching advisor to the All Blacks. Like she's elite. And I remember I was sat next to her at a conference. I was in Vancouver at a Teaching Games for Understanding conference. And there was a woman doing a keynote, and she was talking about the time that you made an intervention and stopped the practice to tell the kids what they needed to do. And she just said this, and Lynn just put her hand up in front of 250 people, and she said, how do you know the kid wasn't just about to work it out for themselves? Yeah. And like the whole room just went silent, and you just kind of go, yeah.
We've got to have a rethink. Yeah.
What a question. And she worked over here at a university for a couple of years. And one of the other influences in my kind of coaching thinking, I suppose, was a guy called Paul Holder. And Noddy, as he is known to many people, still works at the FA. And he came into an early meeting with Lynn. And he walked into this meeting, and this was around developing the youth awards randomly. And he walked into this meeting carrying a massive, big, thick textbook called Motor Learning and Performance, it might have been, by a guy called Richard Schmidt. And Noddy's as mad as a box of frogs, and he's very forward. And Lynn had never met him before. In a room full of FA coach educators, he's walked in with this, and Noddy was one of the national coaches. And she said, with that, no hello, like, why have you got that? And he said, well, I'm writing this, I'm going to use this to develop content. And she went, what's that got to do with coaching? She said it was written by a bloke in a lab with athletes on a treadmill with a VO2 max mask on their face. What's that got to do with coaching? And Paul went, oh my God, I just spent £45 on this book. And she went, well, it's going to make an expensive doorstop. But she was brilliant. So she was the biggest influence. And I remember saying to Lynn, who influenced you? And it was a guy called Bennett Lombardo. And I tracked down a book of his that was written in the 70s or 80s called The Humanistic Coach. And those are the people that made a big influence on me. And there's a guy called John Allpress. As a football person, John's worked at the FA for many, many years. He's now at Tottenham, just goes in as a bit of a development advisor, really. And again, John was massively influenced by Lynn, but just his the way he thought about things, an ex-teacher, and the way he thought about stuff was just brilliant. And John and a guy called Craig Simmons, and Simo worked at Lillishall back, when we had the old School of Excellence, like Sol Campbell, Michael Owen, those kind of people that came through that School of Excellence. And Simo was a physio there, but he was then a player development advisor with the national teams. And I spent a lot of time with Craig. And again, just person first.
Yeah.
Just person first, and just revolutionized how I thought about stuff.
And I guess a good thing for you, Nick, is not only do you see people and meet people that you kind of have maybe a natural gravitation to because you're on that's philosophically aligned, but you also see the outcomes as well. You see these things work in practice. Like, often you can hear from people and they do guest talks and that, and I believe the words, but you get to see it for real, right? You get to see the outcomes. And like you say, some of the players you've seen go through these programs, you see that it's been successful.
Yeah, and I think it's nice. And one of the things I often see, so a lot of the times I do, recruitment for coaches in either my day job or my hobby. And, so I see a lot of coaching CVs, and very rarely do people talk about the impact.
Yeah.
They'll just talk about, well, I've been on this course, or, the role was this. But what's the impact of what you've done? And that's the really important bit. Are the courses, are the way of working making a difference? And I don't keep many things, but I've got one thing that a lad gave me, and I worked with him for 3 years at Fulham, and he's been in the first team at Chelsea this year. He's played in the Champions League. They're called Harvey Vale, who I don't know how old Harvey is now, 18 maybe, 19. In fact, no, not even older, that's 17 perhaps. And he gave me this kind of glass tankard when I left Fulham, which is kind of inscribed on it, written by him. Dear Nick, thank you for making me a better person and player. Harvey Vale, under 11s. And I'm like, love it.
Beautiful, isn't it? Yeah.
You know, and Harvey now is, I mean, look, he's playing the Champions League this year. He's going to have a career. He still plays for Chelsea under 18, which is a little bit unfair, I think, for who they play against. Like when he's played in the first team, yeah. Champions League.
His time's going to come by the sound of it.
Yeah, been on the bench against Real Madrid and stuff. But that for me is the stuff that makes a difference, because I know that I've had an impact on Harvey as a young person.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, look, I don't think it's a silly question. I hope it's not a silly question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. But you seem like the best person to ask this. I think we've done about 8 episodes of the podcast, and what we've never actually asked is, what is coaching? And I think given the fact that you've got such a broad and diverse kind of backgrounds of what you do across the age groups and your experience, stuff like that, I thought, you're the right person to, let's get back to the basics here. At least in your opinion, what is coaching?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think the beauty of it as a question is many people will have a definition that works for them. And that's absolutely cool. And I think it probably aligns a little bit to your philosophy and how and why you do what you do. Coaching ultimately for me is developing people. So coaching is about the development of people, and we help another human to see opportunities that they can take, choose, do something with. We sometimes nudge their behavior to take some of these, whether it's a football specific thing or a sport specific thing, or it's just about them as a person. But ultimately, coaching is about trying to develop somebody, and it's about change in behavior. And then the how bit is the interesting bit that then underpins all of that. Because one thing I guess I probably links to some of the evolution as me as a coach is, I used to think it was, I have to download what's in my head into yours, but it doesn't work. It's kids or adults, other coaches, they're not empty buckets that you have to fill with stuff. It's about putting on the searchlight for them, and then something appears in the spotlight, and then they make sense of it in relation to what they already know. Or you set up a problem, they go and try a load of stuff, they stop using the stuff that doesn't work, and then they keep using the stuff that does work because it leads to the outcome that they're trying to achieve. But ultimately, for me, coaching is a process where we allow other people to think, to be heard, to be valued, not to be dismissed. And how we then do that is the art of coaching.
How important do you think understanding education is? I speak to a lot of coaches, and those that have come from an educational background, maybe they've been teachers before, especially ones in the FA actually, I'm not saying they're better by any stretch, but they seem to understand some of those nuances to be able to kind of get messages across. Do you think there is a correlation between traditional education and coaching, or are they two separate kind of practices?
No, there absolutely is, but to a point, because in the same way that, I've seen a lot of A-licensed, pro-licensed coaches that aren't very good, I've seen a lot of teachers that are not very good.
Yeah, true.
And I've seen a lot of
and vice versa,
fantastic level 2 coaches.
Yeah.
So I think, if you have a view of learning and you only have one view of learning and you don't understand any others, then I think it could be problematic. I think we have, if we want to be a better coach, all we're doing is, our role as a coach is to build a learning environment that enables young people in my case mostly, to learn. So we have to know about learning. Otherwise, and I've seen it a million times, I've worked with coaches that have forgotten more about football than I know.
Yeah.
But I then go and watch them coach, and I think, you just don't understand learning.
Yeah.
And I see, and I've been relatively critical of some of what I've seen since leaving the FA. At times, again, it's, that's not learning. That's just trying to shoehorn information into someone's head. Like, that's not how it works. So I think if you're going to be, a career coach, an intentional coach, or even just one that wants to do it a bit better, having an understanding about learning and different learning philosophies is really important.
So my follow-up question then, building on that, and again, not to be unfair here, but in your opinion, what makes a great coach then? So we know what coaching is, but what makes a great coach? How can you go from being just a coach and going out there and kind of putting on a practice to, in your view, what then could level you up to being a great coach?
So it's some of the stuff that we talked about before. So I think coaches that really consider, the stuff that they're saying is important. So most of the time, the only thing that we can control as a coach is what comes out of our mouth. We can't control how things are interpreted, or what piece of information they take from a coaching session. I remember a session, it was when I was at Fulham, and I'd done a 90-minute session on counter-attacking with the under-10s. And I'd used some new games, of which in my head I thought were great. They worked really well. And it was Ryan Sessegnon's age group, who's now at Tottenham. We talked about when to attack, where to attack, the speed of attack, your decision making on counter-attacking, etc. And I was doing this in the debrief, and we got it all out. And Ryan's twin brother Stephen, who's at Plymouth, I think at the moment, as a pro. And I said, well, what did you take for the session? And Stephen said to me, I learned how to defend when outnumbered. So I'd done 90 minutes on counter-attacking, but he'd taken something entirely opposite that he needed.
Yeah.
So we can't, but the great coaches, start to recognize this, and then they can start to work with individuals about what individuals might need at different times. I think there's 4 core things that great coaches have. They have a really good understanding of self. So they understand their own values and beliefs. They understand their biases, some of the things that drive them, what's important to them. They have a really clear coaching philosophy. They understand what they want to do and why. The second thing is that they have a really good understanding of individuals. So they'll know about self-determination theory and how to create autonomy, belonging, and competence for young people. They know about developing really good relationships. The third thing is they have a really good understanding of creating an environment. So how do they create an environment that enables people to thrive? They'll know what that looks like, how to create it, the interactions that they need to create. And then the fourth thing is they've got a really good understanding of coaching practice. So they'll know about games or activities that they know can develop certain technical or tactical outcomes. They'll have a really good understanding of their coaching behaviors and how that can impact on other people. They'll really think about learning and the types of questions that they have to ask in order to work with different kids. So there was 2 kids in the group, in one of my groups at Fulham. There was one kid called Cal. He was a really smart kid. I had to say to Cal, what's the difference between playing 3v2 in a tight space and playing 3v2 in a bigger space? What different things are you going to use to exploit that? That's the kind of question that he needed, because it was quite high level. I had to say to one kid, what part of the foot you're going to use to get the ball in there? Because he needed something different. So that for me is then the coaching practice. So coaches that have a really good understanding of self, individuals, environment, and coaching practice, they're the ones that separate themselves from the good.
Yeah.
But at the heart of all of this is relationships. Coach-athlete relationships are ultimately what drive stuff. And how you plan for those is really important, because coaching doesn't start and stop when you get onto the pitch. or on the court or in the pool, wherever your coaching environment might be. So quite a lot of the time this year, through pre-season, for example, I deliberately walked with players from the change rooms to the car park. And they think I was just going to my car. I did it about 4 or 5 times to have conversations with players.
Yep.
I knew there was one lad who then got the train back to London, and all he did was want to engage through voice notes on the train because he was on the train, and that's how. But that for me was times to get messages across and talk about stuff and start to understand and develop a relationship with him, etc. So coaching is not just the X's and the O's, as you mentioned earlier. Coaching is way more complex. And if you speak to any elite coach and elite player, the tech stuff is tiny percentage. And I've been doing some interviews at the moment with some Olympians, and I spoke to a girl called Laura Unsworth, who's the most decorated Olympic hockey player. She's won medals at the last 3 Olympic Games. And I said, tell me about being an elite player. And she said, it's 90% psychological. She went the tech bit, she went the skills, she went that's the tiny bit. She went most of it is about between the ears. And conversations that, and equally why I think Gareth is very successful in his role at the moment as England national manager is because he is bloody good at developing relationships with people.
Yeah.
And he cares about people first and foremost.
I totally agree, Nick. And I think that the old language he would have been like, they're really good man managers, that's the old talk. But I think it's gone way beyond that, hasn't it now? I mean, the art of kind of managing a dressing room is one thing, but it's much bigger than that now, isn't it? And like you say, that those 2-minute walks just to or from training with the players, that 30 seconds of how was school, or what's going on today, or what's going on, that is much more impactful than a 90-minute session where you're kind of just talking about the product, if you like, the football or whatever sport it may be. It's those moments, like they just have a way of getting the connection, right? And then that makes everything a bit easier.
Yeah. And funnily enough, people perform better.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Can you imagine?
Can
you imagine developing a better relationship with somebody will help them perform better? We get obsessed by performance, but you'll get a better performance because they'll try a little bit harder or they'll run a bit longer and they'll concentrate a bit more because you've developed a really good relationship with them.
Yeah. And it's that whole trust in the process, right? Isn't it? Don't worry about the outcome so much. They will come if you trust the process and you build up those things in place to get you there. Those 4 things are fantastic. Self-awareness, the individual, the environment, coaching practices. I mean, that's it, isn't it? It's all in there. And I mean, there's a lot in each of those 4 things individually. There's a lot more things you can delve into and get better at, but that does position it really nicely. So, and Nick, I'm going to push you even harder now. Then I don't know if you can help or not, but obviously, a lot of our audience, they're not professional coaches, they're not paid coaches. A lot will be volunteers, certainly part time, even if they are being paid, and a lot will be parents and working in grassroots environments. How can they maximize their potential? How can coaches be the best they can be? And I'm not, they can't all go and do loads of courses and spend, their full-time jobs. But what ways could they maybe achieve to be really good with their self-awareness or understanding individuals or creating the right environment or getting good at their coaching practices? Are there tips or suggestions you could have for them?
Yeah, I think when you look at the things that have the biggest impact on coaches, it's very rarely a coaching course. It's very rarely a coaching course. And arguably, the trend to digital learning at the moment is having another impact on the experience that you have because you're not, in the real world with people. However, that has to be part of it. But I think more important than the coaching courses are 2 things. One is find yourself a mentor, somebody that can come and watch you coach, that might have done it a bit longer than you, or even if it's just a peer in your club in a different age group that can just come down and just give you a few pointers because they see different things to you. So finding somebody that can do that is really helpful. And the second thing I would say is practice. Go try stuff. We work in coaching or we volunteer in coaching where, unless we get something like really, really wrong, like most of the time, it doesn't matter if it doesn't work, and arguably, and I've done it this year. I've set it up where the kids, I've said to the kids, look, we want you to be brave and try new stuff when you're playing. So I'm going to be brave and try a new practice right now. I don't know if it will work. It might not. You can tell me afterwards what you liked or didn't like about it, or what it helped you with or didn't. But, you know, as a coach, you're then giving yourself permission to try things, and you're practicing vulnerability, which is a really important life skill for people. And you've teed it up to go, look, I'm going to be brave and try something, and it might not work, but it's all right if it doesn't, because it's not like, you know, we don't work in heart surgery where someone says, look, I'm going to fix this artery in a different way to the aorta. Like we don't do that kind of stuff. So we can try things, but get as much different experience with different age groups, with boys, girls, you know, where you can, whether it's schools, clubs, disability, whatever the environment might be. The more exposure you can get to different things is really important. But we're also in a world now where you've got access to brilliant stuff through your phone. You know, like what you do here with this is top draw, because it means that anybody around the world on demand for them can access learning in a different way. So, you know, read stuff, listen to podcasts. You know, I'm sure a lot of people get into bed and spend half an hour on their phone, killing time, not doing very much. You know, how could you use that? Stick this podcast on and go for a walk. You know, but those things I think are as important, if not more important, than going on a course, because for volunteers, time is often the biggest hurdle. You know, and they haven't got a course on at the right time that you need it, or it's too expensive, and all of those different barriers that exist. But with online learning and access to information, make sure that you use those kind of things, because they're readily available now.
If there's a coach, Nick, that's, you know, maybe they're doing it part-time, they might have 2 sessions a week with their team, and maybe a bit of time at the weekend or whatever else, would you encourage them to every now and then step away from their team and maybe visit another team and help out there, or just watch and observe, or maybe even try a different sport and look at something else, maybe going down the local cricket club or the rugby club or something and look at that? I mean, and I know it's hard because we're so precious with our time. We want every minute with our players because we want to make sure we get the best out of them, and the other coach down the road might be doing something, you know, that we're not. So we've got to make sure that we're ahead of the curve. But actually, would you say that that's okay? Drop a session here and there, and you're going to get more out of it on the return by taking that time away, even though you're going to lose a session with your players. I mean, the session still go on. I'm not saying cancel it. Find someone else, step in for them, but you go and do something else for a week or two.
100%. And now, you know, the last 4.5 years for me, not working full time within football and stepping into the, you know, Olympic sports world, and certainly now kind of looking at football coaches, they're very blinkered.
Yeah.
They, and clearly not all, but majority, I think, you know, where do they look to for their coaching knowledge? Well, what's the latest practice that Jurgen Klopp or Pep Guardiola has put on? Right, okay, I'm going to take that and I'll do it with my under 10s. Or they'll look for an academy session put on by someone else within football, because it goes back to a lot of the time they're driven by needs of practice as opposed to coaching. But what I've certainly experienced from across the Olympics world is they're much more welcoming of learning from other sports. I sat in a really interesting conversation with a boxing coach, a rowing coach, and a shooting coach. And we were having a really good conversation about dynamic balance and the importance of it. And, you know, the shooting coach saying about how they worked on core stability to, you know, for pistol shooting, and how that differed from skeet shooting, or if it was in pentathlon, what it looked like there. And, you know, the boxing coach talking about the ability to have dynamic balance on the move, otherwise you're going to get hit, and how they go about developing it. And the rowing bloke talking about how, you know, like, if you get wet if you haven't got really good dynamic balance, and how. But for me, that was fascinating conversation. And I learned more about how they do things. But our programs that I work with now at UK Coaching are mostly cross-sport. And we send coaches from different sports into different environments. What can they learn? What ideas can they steal and take back to their own environments? And I would absolutely urge football coaches to get out of football and go and watch a different coach work in a different sport and do a reciprocal thing. You know, I'm going to go and watch you work at your gymnastics club or at your rugby club if you want to pick a team-to-team sport, and then you years afterwards over a pint in the pub. Awesome. That kind of stuff is brilliant.
I did a podcast a couple of weeks back with two guys, and one's a soccer coach and one was a racing car driver in the States. And they were talking about how they're, and they're both coaches, but the crossover between those two sports, like even racing car driving and football has a crossover. They were saying like decision making, scanning, awareness, these kind of things, and actually, obviously in racing car, it's even more heightened because every split second really, really does matter. You don't get much time in football, but in racing car driving, it's even more so, as I understand it. And they were talking about that. So you're dead right. There's, we can learn so much, can't we, if we just step outside our own little world and actually maybe even learn to a higher level some of these things, because they do it even more finely tuned in some other sports.
Oh, I cannot recommend it enough. Just to, if you're a football coach, get out of football. Go and look at other things. Don't just look to football. And look, and football coaches have an ego, and they think that, well, it's only it's a different game. It's not football. Nonsense. Yeah. It's nonsense. You're still developing coaching. You're still developing people.
Yeah, so true. Well, if you don't mind, again, I don't know if you can help this one or not, but do you see some common mistakes? I use mistakes in like quotation marks now, because I don't necessarily call them mistakes, but things that we do wrong sometimes as coaches when we're trying to get better and develop ourselves. Is there things that we kind of maybe run down rabbit holes we shouldn't go down? Or, do we, I don't know, any kind of things you see generally where we don't get it right when it comes to our own personal development?
Yeah, I think, I guess there's two things that jump to mind. One thing is, we focus too much on technical tactical. And I go back to what elite coaches, elite players think about what ultimately makes the difference at the top end is not technical tactical. And even more important when we're working in grassroots coaching is the fact that technical tactical is not the most important. So let's be fair. 99% of the kids that play grassroots football anywhere in the world are not going to become professional players. However, 100% of them are going to become citizens of the country. Yeah. And in order to develop better citizens, we need to develop better people that are more well-rounded humans that have a different set of skills. And focusing too much on tech misses ultimately what the purpose of coaching is about. In my opinion, entirely in my opinion. So we can get drawn too much into that and we miss some of the stuff that matters, because some of the stuff that matters is, how do you interact with kids on match day? What kind of environment do you create that enables kids to be the best version of themselves? And how do you create that? Because you being stood 5 yards on the pitch and shouting at kids on match day because they're losing and it might affect your ego, you're kind of missing the point, and that's a mistake. So, how you can kind of check and challenge your own behavior, because most of the time, adult values are different to children's values, and we worry about the wrong things too much. So just missing some of those. But as I go back to what I said earlier on, sometimes surviving that hour and a half with enough practices and games is what you need. But don't neglect the important bit, which is about the interactions with young people or the players that you're working with, that has the biggest meaningful difference. And
again, not to be unfair on you, and I don't want to put you in an awkward position here, but with football specifically, and particularly in England, does the environment hinder that a little bit? And I'm not leading question here, but obviously I work in the grassroots space, and I think coaching, I said before, I think our coaching's come on loads. I know our little club has, certainly what I see has, I think the coaches improved loads. What I'm still really worried about, and I think in some ways on a personal level, I think it may have gone backwards, is the actual match day experience for players. And I mean from under 7s up to under 17s, so I just think that environment, can be counterproductive to some of these other approaches we would like to take. Is that something you're aware of, or do you not really see that because maybe you don't because it's not what you're doing? I mean, you've got the under-8s team, so maybe you do see it with your son's team, but what do you think?
The match day experience is really important, and it's different to training, and we can't think that they're the same thing for kids, because training is just them, their mates, the coaches that they're familiar with. And then as soon as you turn up on match day and you've got another team in a different kit that are trying to stop you doing what you're trying to do, and they might kick you and it might hurt, and people are shouting at you from the side, and it's a very different environment, and they're two different things. So we have to consider what match day looks like for kids, because it does look different. But equally, and you kind of link it back to that kind of definition of coaching. So match day for me is just an extension of learning. It's just, what have we done in training? Can you now go and do it in a match? What have you done in training? Can you do it in a match? And very rarely, and certainly not with the kids, is my training the following Tuesday influenced by what happened on the Saturday. We concede 3 goals from in-swinging corners, then all of a sudden you're doing defending in-swinging corners as your topic. Like that, because for me, this is a real long-term view of helping kids get better at sport in this case. So it's just an extension of learning. I can remember a game when I was in the academy. I can still remember the kid, Courtney Swaby. And Courtney was in the under-10s at the time. He was a brilliant kid. You could have put him with the under-18s and he would have been running the show. Most streetwise kid you've ever met. And in training that week, we've been focusing on support play from behind to get in front. So overlaps, underlaps, etc. And I'm still picturing him now. Game going on away at Portsmouth, and he's made a massive run as an underlap, got the ball, and had a shot. Missed. He literally just came running over to me on the side of the pitch. He went, "Did you see it? I've just done it. I did it." I'm like, "Courtney, game's going on. Nice work, mate, but keep going."
But the game.
That for me,
that's massive.
That was it.
Yeah,
that was it. It was an extension of what you've been doing in training. But I also really appreciate that adults can get a little bit overexcited and a bit emotional when it comes to football matches between teams, and they think that the score reflects them as a coach and whether they're good or not. I mean, I have got absolutely no idea how many games that we've won or lost or anything this year in the under-8s. Not a clue. I could probably say that we've lost way more than we've won, but I don't think that reflects me as a coach. 100%. I've been working with these kids to help them get a bit better. We started out with 14 at the start of the year. We've lost more games than we've won. I've still got 14 kids.
Yeah, that says it all, doesn't it? Yeah. They speak with their feet, don't they? Mind you, sometimes it's the parents that might be thinking as well. But I think if you're doing the right thing, then the results don't matter. It's if they're enjoying it and they're learning and they're getting better. But I think the truth there as well, Nick, is you can win games. I would imagine if you wanted to win more games, you could. But making those decisions to win games may come at so if you focus on the results more, then that's going to come at the expense of something else that you think is more valuable. And that's that development, that kind of maybe that ownership part of it, or that long-term thinking. And I think that does happen. And I think part of that is driven by some coaches, and I'm not making excuses for this, but I think because they do get a bit focused on I need to look good on a Sunday on results day, if you call it that, and it's hard because that's maybe the environment they're in, or the club that they're at, that's the culture, And again, I'm not being critical, but I wonder if we could do more just to soften that a little bit, so we could all go to games where, in the idealistic world, where we got 2 coaches that understand it's all about the kids first, and we allow mistakes, and the results to us don't matter as long as they're having a good experience. One's going to win, one's going to lose probably, but that's all okay as long as we're learning. I don't know whether we're quite there yet on match days. I think we're moving maybe, but maybe it's okay that we're not. Maybe it's just a different. I need to get my head around the fact it's just a different learning day. A Sunday is different to what we do at training on a Wednesday or a Saturday. Maybe that's the way it should be.
Well, we're definitely not there yet. And part of that is the system that we operate within. So I remember it was a league game, under 13 league game in Birmingham. And one team turned up with 8 players because they had a few kids off. The other team turned up with 14. So the team that turned up with 14 said, well, you play with our 3 subs and we'll play 11v11. You know,
Yep.
Brilliant. It's what the kids would have done.
Yes, exactly.
They agreed to score for the league, blah, blah, blah. Not a problem. The league found out. So the team that only had 8 players got fined for playing ineligible players and docked them points.
This is where the adults get in the way, isn't it? It's crazy, isn't it? Oh,
and I get it. And I can see why, because the league have followed the rules that are in place. But this isn't what kids' sport would look like if kids were in charge.
yeah, exactly.
Because when me and you grew up and you were playing on the playground and it was, whatever, teams versus teams. And as soon as it got to like 4 or 5-0, you go, right, Scott, you're the best player. You go on that team and you two are rubbish. So you'll swap onto there and you'll play 4v6. But,
I mean, that never happened with me being the best player, by the way, Nick. But I know what you mean. But you know what? They'd have 16 versus 8, but they'd make it right when the kids would make it right. And you know what? There'd be hardly any tears, hardly any arguments. They'd sort it out. I do think sometimes we get in the way as adults, don't we? We just sometimes, and best intentions. I totally understand that. And look, hey, grassroots football is huge in this country, and and fair play to the success of getting kids out playing football, so it's brilliant. But sometimes you've got to look back and say, are we doing it right? Could we do it even better? And so there's a lot. We've got a club league handbook, and it must be, I think it's about 20 pages in it. Half the pages are the fines, like what you get for doing things wrong. And to me, that kind of says it all almost. Half is about the fiction, half is about the fines. One
of the best leagues in the country, the Bolton Berrien District Junior League up in Lancashire, have never ever fined a team.
There you go.
Never.
They've got their priorities right.
Because they focus on education and helping people get better. And you know what? They don't have any problems. They've been growing year on year and arguably in one of the best leagues in the country for what they do. I remember an academy match against Brighton, and just because of the age groups that we had, the group that I had were particularly strong. The group that Brighton had weren't particularly strong. So we knew this. So during the week, I phoned their coach, who I knew, and I said, look, let's sort the game out before we play. So I said, right, in training, we've been working on counter-attacking. So in the first quarter, can you high press?
Yep.
So we can try and win the ball back and counter-attack quick. In the second quarter, we did something to help them.
Yeah.
So that's, relatively sensible, but there wasn't, academy football, there's no league table 3 points and the emotion of that attached to it. So it's a different experience. However, I still think adults could work collaboratively better together, certainly at mini soccer.
Yeah.
Certainly at mini soccer, where kids are driven by much more intrinsic reasons than they do at the moment.
And it's ironic, isn't it? You think actually the academy system can sometimes provide a better match environment with in less pressure and stress, in inverted commas again. Even though these kids are technically the ones are more likely to maybe make it professionally. I'm not, again, the odds are very much stacked against anyone in the system because that's just a numbers game. But they're on that, they're at least in that space where actually there's the Sunday grassroots stuff, which should be like no pressure and stress, can almost feel like it's worse. So, again, maybe it's, and I'm speaking generally, and I'm sure there's some great leagues and some great clubs doing some great things. It just, you hear some horror stories about what happens at the weekend. But it's good to hear that there are leagues out there doing the right thing, and not finding, I think, is a massive step in the right direction. Nick, I wondered, what's your view maybe on how things may evolve in the next 5 or 10 years with regards to coaching? How do you see things developing?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 things for me. We have to think about how the changing world that we live in is going to impact on future generations, right? So I'll give you an example, and this is going to be slightly left field, but bear with it. So climate change is a huge issue. And in this country, the Humber, the Hull area, and the Black Country, just north of Birmingham, are we've got the 2 highest carbon footprints in the country. So they've got some real issues there. And we know that through the impact of climate change, the world is going to increase in temperature. Now, in order to deal with the increase in temperature, all the science is telling us that people need to have a better physiological system and VO2 max in order to deal with an increase in temperature. So in order to have a better VO2 max, you're going to be able to need to use your body better to stay physically active for longer, along with all of the obesity and health challenges that we have in this country as well. So for me, we really have to think about what does developing functional movement solutions and fundamental movement skills look like for kids in that 5 to 11 age group now. Because equally, we know that primary school PE on the whole is not great, and kids are not necessarily getting everything that they need there. So I think challenge number one is, how do we develop a more physically literate generation of young people coming through? I think that's challenge number one. So I told you it was a little bit tenuous, from climate change to movement skills.
It's never been mentioned before, Nick. We've never had that, but like, I can see where you're coming from 100%. I mean, the reality is these things are on our doorstep now, right? And they're certainly not going to get better in the short term. And preparing our young people for the world they're going to grow up in is what we're supposed to do as adults, right? To help our young people get there. And the physical side to it is as important as the mental side.
And, you know, and coaches will say, well, I'm just doing an hour of football coaching each week. And I'm like, well, you are.
Yeah.
But the kids are learning these skills when they're with you.
Yeah. It's habits, right?
Correct. So it's just about how you think about incorporating them within your coaching a bit more readily. The second thing is, our coaching has to focus on some skills in a different way. So learning mindset, critical thinking, adaptability, grit, resilience, working within teams, being comfortable in ambiguity, thriving in a virtual world. These are all the things that are really important. And I was chatting to a woman called Kath Bishop, who was an ex-Olympic rower. And I said to Kath, if you had all of those, do you think you would have been a better Olympian? And she said that all of those things are absolutely essential to being an elite performer. And I said, it's interesting because all of those things have nothing to do with sport.
Yeah.
Those things have been identified by the Forbes Human Resource Council that are looking at the future skills of the workforce that we need in this world. Now, we've got the opportunity through sport to develop loads of those things.
And like you said at the very beginning, I think you're talking about actually, you know, okay, they might be sports people now, and who knows how far that career will go with them, but they're going to be citizens, right? They're going to be people that have to have, you know, in a world where, you know, things change quicker than ever, you know, these young people need to be adaptable, resilient, critical thinkers, analyze, make judgments, you know, be confident, be able to present, you know, articulate themselves. I mean, all these things, even more heightened than maybe when we were younger and we were on these journeys where you may have had 1 or 2 jobs for life and you kind of picked your career and that was your career and stuff. Those days I think have gone, haven't they? You know, it's different. And that's different now. It'll be certainly different in 15 years' time when these 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds are in the workplace again. So, and sport's got such a wonderful opportunity to help develop those things, hasn't it?
100%, absolutely. And you know, it's weird, but you know, my son's age now, in the 7, nearly 8-year-old. You know, the chances are that most of the jobs that his team and teammates will do when they're older don't exist now.
Don't exist. Yeah, that's mad, isn't it? Yeah,
it's weird, right? But how do we equip them to deal with the future needs and changes that they're gonna create? And again, people will go, well, that's, you know, but I'm a football coach. You know, I volunteer an hour a week. Yeah, but I organise a practice and I say to the kids, right, you've got 2 minutes to come up with a strategy about how you're going to play the game. Get into your team and see if you can work it out. When they're in their little team, that's the moment I'm interested in.
Yeah.
You know, who talks over everybody and dominates the conversation? Who doesn't speak? Who brings other people into the conversation? Who's able to articulate things in different ways? That's the skills bit that they're going to need, because I work in a team of people at work, you know, and I have to be conscious about how I engage with other people in different ways. And part of that I've picked up through playing sport. I still get football outcome.
Yeah.
Because they then go off and they do whatever tactic or strategy they want to do.
And I would argue an even better football outcome, because actually, you know what, decision making in the moment is what football's all about, right? You know, how much you shout on the side as a coach during a game, you know, you ain't going to influence anything really. The players got to do that themselves. We have the little team I look after, we agreed on 3 core values that, you know, which is respect, effort, fun. So it's REF, so it's respect, effort, fun. That's our core values. That's what we do across everything. That's the players, parents, everything we do is respect, effort, fun. But our behaviors as a team, for me as well as them, are 6 things. We have desire to compete, desire to improve, resilience, confidence, ownership, and teamwork. And there are 6 behaviors. And we talk about those 6 behaviors a lot and stuff, and how they're in the games and which ones are really important in this bit here and stuff like that. So, and again, these things they relate to football, but all of them can relate to life as well outside of school, outside of football, sorry. And what I get the most feedback from the parents is not how great the sessions are or how wonderful the football is, but the message the kids come back with, you know, how they behave in the sessions, how they're focused, how they communicate better, and how they see their kids talking more on a Monday night session than they would maybe in school or something else, you know. And I think that's the bit that I relish, and it's creating that. But Nick, ironically, they become better players as well. We actually have a better team for it because we have these things, these behaviours that they embrace and value and really work towards.
Yeah, love that. And, you know, I think, you know, people listening to this, rewind 15 seconds and listen to what Scott just said again, you know, because that's really important. We had a session with the under-8s probably about a month ago now, and I knew what would happen because of the games that I chose. But there's lots of kind of coming together and clashing physically. And I could have predicted that Oscar would kick Ethan and Mike Allen would push someone over. Like, I could predict this kind of stuff. And then we brought them all in, and we had a really interesting conversation with the kids about emotions. And, you know, if somebody was on a clock looking at my ball rolling time or something like, you know, they'd have gone, yeah, but you had an 8-9 minute stoppage there. Yeah. And I'd go, yeah. And I loved every minute of it because we had a brilliant conversation about what happens when you get fouled. How do you feel?
Yeah.
And one kid, Sam, I get really angry and frustrated and I want to use a bad word. So thought, right, okay, cool. Right, so how do we get ourselves from being really red, because we talked about zones of regulation, how do we get ourselves into a different colour? And Sam said, well, I sit down and I meditate for a few minutes, and then and he puts his fingers together and he said, I take a few deep breaths and I get playing again. And I said, Sam, that's brilliant.
Can you speed it up a little bit? Yeah.
But did you hear what he said about the counting bit? So we had a really good conversation about emotional development. Kids went back playing off the went. So I went, any of you familiar with zones of regulation? If they talked about it from school, and a couple of them went, oh yeah, no, we've talked about that. And one said, oh, I've got it on the fridge. Brilliant. So then the parents have got the same language that I've just talked about with the lads. So they can start to reinforce those messages as well. But it wasn't, 80% ball rolling time because I stopped it for 8-9 minutes. And you know what? And if somebody had said, well, you failed something, I said, well, I couldn't care less. No, because the conversation that we've just had with the kids was really important.
That's 9 minutes well spent, isn't it? If it is 9 minutes, you think, actually, you know what, the ball rolling time I'm all for, but actually if you're sacrificing something, then, it's got to be worth sacrificing for. And that I just think those values are so important. And that's what under 7s and under 8s, right? 7, 8 year old kids. It shows you, don't underestimate what you can do with these young players. And actually at that age, they love it. They embrace it and they get a real sense of ownership, don't they? If you can take them on that journey with you.
It was great, and to assume that they don't know about emotions because they're only 7 and 8 is foolish of us. And they talk about this stuff at school, and they might not have a broad vocabulary on how to describe things, but they've watched Inside Out and they know about emotions because they watched Disney films about it, and that stuff's really important.
So Nick, I pushed my luck with your time. I said an hour and I've gone well over that already, so I do apologise. But if you're okay, my final proper question, if that's all right. We ask all our guests this question. I'd be keen to know what you think. If there was just one thing you could change about the world of coaching, what might that be? You may have covered it already, I don't know, but just in case you haven't, if there was one thing you could change.
I'm going to cheat. I'm going to give you 2. One is focus on those people skills stuff. as important as the sport bit. So football skills and people skills. The most important thing, I think, is recognize that it is not about you. It is about a very important role about how we support the development of a young person in many cases. But arguably, I would say I've had really important conversations with the first team players that are grown adults-ish in some cases. That it is about supporting the development of other people. It's not about you.
Love it. So true. And you know what the funny thing about Nick again is if you really believe that and you get it in your head and you think actually it's not about me, it actually takes quite a lot of pressure off as well. You know, as the coach, know what, don't worry about it. And like I said, the scores that Maron, it's not about me, it's about the kids. I'm doing the right thing by the kids. And when you've got a decision to make and think it's a tough choice, it's not a tough. Just ask yourself what's best for the kids or what's best for the players I'm developing. And then the choice becomes a lot easier to make, you know.
Absolutely. And definitely on match day, just relax, sit down, enjoy watching the kids play.
Yeah.
Like, you know, coaches that do more walking up and down the touchline than some of the kids are doing. I'm like, oh, gosh, get yourself a chair, mate. Sit down, chill.
Yeah. Brilliant. Nick, you've been a star. Thank you so much. I bigged you up at the beginning and you've exceeded my expectations with all that stuff. So thanks so much.
That's very kind. Thank you.
Well, look, I know it's like you do these things day in, day out. So it probably seems like a normal conversation about common sense stuff, but I can take it from me as, you know, as one of these coaches out there trying to do the best I can, that hearing from people like you and those messages, they just help me cement my ideas and pick things up. And, you know, and ultimately what the hope is here, it gives the players I support an even better journey because they get a better experience from me being a bit better, maybe at putting these sessions on for them. So thank you so much. What are your plans? I know you're very busy and your whole home life is surrounded by sport and sports psychology and coaching and stuff like that. But what are your plans maybe for now or moving forward?
Do you know what? Got no idea.
Taking the under-8s to the Premier League, no doubt.
Well, definitely not. Look, I think the more I can just keep helping some kids and some coaches get a little bit better, that's the important bit. You know, the work that we do at UK Coaching, I think, is really important because it focuses on the skills of coaching to help people become better coaches, and that's really at the heart of what we do. You know, I had a meeting this morning about setting up a new girls section and a recreational women's section at the club, and just kind of using some spare pitch time that we've got to do some different bits. But I think for me, it's just keep enjoying what you're doing. You know, you never know when the clock's going to stop, right? So
yeah, exactly. Embrace it and enjoy it. Well, I know how passionate you are about this world, and you're doing something I feel like you love, and you know, you give a lot out to the community and different roles you're doing. You do it as a full-time job. You've got part-time gigs going on there as well with the work you do with the first team and the under-8s and everything. So look, I wish you the best of luck with everything, Nick. I will be consistently following you and listen to help the stuff you put out there. Love to have you back on again at some point in the future if you're up for it.
Yeah, of course.
Something else to cover. But if people want to find out more about you, UK Coaching, or the work you do, what's the best way of reaching out or doing that?
Yeah, definitely just drop me a message on Twitter. I have the occasional rant on there. At N Levett on Twitter. So yeah, feel free to drop me a message on there. I've been a bit lazy on my blog recently, but I've got a blog called riversofthinking.com. So there's a few bits on there. And ukcoaching.org is where we have a lot of our kind of content that people can access as well. So yeah, feel free, and hopefully I'm not as scary as Scott thought, taking 3 years to reach out. So feel free.
That was my own insecurity there. No, Nick, I'll put the links in the show notes to your Twitter handle, to the blog. I was looking at the blog a few weeks back, and maybe I haven't found it, but it's been a while since you've done some. When was the last one you done?
Oh, a couple of years now.
Yeah, that's what I also missed some or not. But yeah, but there's some good articles on there. You've written some good stuff, so I'd highly recommend that. But I'll put the link in the show notes because there's some great stuff there. Nick, thanks so much. I'm really grateful. Appreciate everything you're doing for in the world of coaching and stuff. And I look forward to speaking to you again at some point in the future.
No worries. Thanks for the invite.
This episode was brought to you in association with our friends at Soccer Coach Weekly. Established since 2006, Soccer Coach Weekly is a leading source of inspiration and advice for all grassroots coaches. Join thousands of youth soccer coaches just like you, saving time and effort in their goal of having the most effective, enjoyable and successful coaching journey for them and their players. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode.